15 or 20 years old. And at the end of summer, beginning of fall, it produces a bunch of little tiny plums. We end up giving some plums away to our neighbors. One of our neighbors gives us eggs from her chickens all summer, and then at the end of the summer we give her a bunch of plums. adjusted to make all of my plums fit just like that. Next up, I poured the lemon juice on top and spread it around, and then I topped it with the sugar and cinnamon. It probably would have been easier to mix these together before sprinkling them over the top. And there we go. Now we're ready for the oven, and that will be 45 minutes at 350 degrees. Then it's time to take the cake out and let it cool on a wire rack for at least 30 minutes. I did check to make sure that it was fully cooked with a clean toothpick coming out. And once it's cool, I popped it out of the springform pan and cut it up so I could put it in the refrigerator. And we're back for the final reveal. The result of our baking. Let me show you here. So, you can see, I hope, it's kind of hard with this plate. It's a pretty dense crumb, and it's got a nice crust on the outside and the bottom. The top can look a little burnt because of the cinnamon sugar, the dark purple plum color, and that lemon juice that makes sort of like a glaze. But I promise it's not burnt. It's just delicious. I'm not a big fan of eating sounds, so I'm not going to eat it on camera. But I'll tell you that the plums give it this lovely soft texture. And then the bottom of the cake is almost like a pie crust. Like it's a little harder on the bottom. So you have this lovely soft plum, this dense soft